So welcome everybody to our Think More to Stress Less webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan, and for the last 20 plus years now, I've been working in learning development, concentrating mainly on developing helpful habits and positive behaviours at that kind of individual and team organisational level. My background before that was in hospitality, but over the last 23 years now, I've actually got a background in psychology and lastly in neuroscience, neuro leadership, organisational neuroscience. And I've just recently embarked actually at the very beginning of a very long journey towards a doctorate in organisational psychology. Organisational neuroscience. Stress is a normal reaction to everyday pressures, which everyone, all of us at some point in our lives will experience. In the workplace, pressure is unavoidable due to the ever-increasing demands and challenges that our organisations are facing. But not all stress is bad. In some instances, pressure can be a good thing. When we perceive the pressure we are under is at an acceptable level, it can motivate us and help us to focus on what needs to be done. However, when the pressure we're experiencing becomes excessive or unmanageable, when there's little or no respite from the pressure, that's when it can lead to anxiety, depression, and even life-threatening diseases. Think More to Stress Less is not a typical stress management program or webinar, which leaves you with the usual toolkit of breathing activities, exercise, tips for healthy eating, and getting a good night's sleep. Today, we're going to be following the science and breaking down our time together into 3 chapters. In chapter 1, we're going to be looking at the current thinking around stress. Chapter 2, we're going to move on to look at alternative ways of thinking about stress and stressful situations. And in chapter 3, we're going to talk and look at the Think More to Stress Less model, which is a behavioural-based coping strategy designed to change the way we think about and respond to stressful situations. Start chapter 1 by asking you 2 questions, and I'd like you to pop your answers into chat for me if you would. Question: thinking about the last 12 months, have you experienced a little stress, a moderate amount of stress, or a lot of stress? So if you could just pop your answers into chat, that would be absolutely wonderful. So a little, a moderate, or a lot of stress have you experienced? Brilliant. So question 2. Do you believe that stress is harmful to your health or not harmful to your health? Again, I'd like you to pop your answers into the chat for me. Yep, perfect. That's lovely. Thank you. We're going to come back to those answers shortly, but for the moment, I'm just going to leave them as they are. Now, what I'd like you to do is just take a minute to reflect upon time in your life when you have performed at your best, when you've done some of your very best work. And I want you to kind of think about, what was it that fueled you to perform at your highest level? What motivated you to go on and perform at your very, very best? And again, if you could just pop maybe 1 or 2 words into chat. What was it that motivated you, that fueled you to do some of your very best work? Great answers coming through there. making a difference, having autonomy, sense of achievement, support, good communication, positive impact, appreciation, trust. And if we were to spend time and really dig down and kind of under those motivations, somewhere in there, there would be an element of pressure. Pressure, whether that's in our own, our own sense of achievement, pressure in not wanting to let other people down, pressure in kind of being wanting to do the very best job that we can. So yeah, pressure. A burning bridge, we had to work together to make changes quickly. Yeah, absolutely. Building your own skills. Yeah. Pressure again, that internal kind of pressure that we want to kind of develop and grow and be better. And what we're starting to actually see is that pressure, sometimes pressure referred to as stress, the two words are used interchangeably, but it's not all bad. I like to think about pressure or stress as our inner superhero. Pressure or a feeling of a level of stress can be beneficial for our performance. And just think about it, when you've had a day off, let's say, you haven't made any plans to do anything specific, there's nothing really pressing that you have to do that day. Now, many of us in that kind of situation end up achieving very little that day. And sometimes we actually end up being bored or even frustrated that we haven't really kind of done very much with the day. Or another example is, and I used to work in the hospitality sector, so I have seen this and been part of this as well over the years. But another example, if you go out for a meal and the restaurant is quiet, that tends to be the time that you tend to get poor service compared to if you go back to that same restaurant and it's absolutely heaving, really, really busy, then very often the service is far better than it is when the restaurant is quiet. So what is it that makes a difference? The difference is very often it's pressure that makes the difference. So stress is not, or pressure is not always bad. As we can see from the stress curve on screen, to perform at our best, we all need a level of pressure. The key is getting the right level of pressure for the individual. No two people or no two brains are the same. So everyone should be aware of their own stress tolerance levels, which links back to the importance of having those higher levels of self-awareness and understanding. Is perceived by the individual as being at an acceptable level for them, it can help them to focus the mind and provides that motivation that we've just spoken about. And this type of pressure is known as eustress. However, if the pressure is perceived as not being at an acceptable level by the individual, so it doesn't matter what you think about the pressure that's being put on an individual, it's what they perceive to be an acceptable level by themselves, then this is what's commonly referred to as stress, or the proper term being distress, when the pressure is perceived by the individual as being too high, not an acceptable level. Now, the human body has an innate coping mechanism for managing the effects of stress, and when the pressure or stressful situation goes away, then the body recovers quickly. Unfortunately, the human nervous system and brain have not yet adapted to life in the 21st century. Our innate stress coping mechanisms date back to a time when life was very different, a time when stress factors were more survival orientated and not constant. There's clearly a massive difference today where we are constantly switched on and the challenges and demands upon us are high with little or no respite. Long-term stress and anxiety is nothing new. It's been steadily rising in the population for many years, even before the pandemic or the current global challenges. And as we know, if pressure becomes excessive, and left unmanaged for prolonged periods of time, well, that's when it can lead to the life-threatening diseases and anxiety and depression, etc. In our lives are not necessarily one or two major situations. Stress is cumulative. All of those everyday stresses that we all have, getting stuck in traffic jams, illness, public transport strikes, problems at home, all add up and can take us close to our stress thresholds. And that's before we've even thought about the demands and challenges in the workplace. And in actual fact, I was reading today that the biggest challenge, the biggest stress factor at the moment in most people's lives is the cost of living and the rising costs, etc., which is hardly surprising. Stress is conventionally defined as, let you read that. McEwen and Giordano's also suggested that, and I'll give you a second to read it. The way we respond to stressful situations and the impact it has upon us is determined by the way we think about stress. So the way we respond to a stressful situation and the actual impact it has upon our health and well-being is determined by the way we think about stress. So I want to go back now to those two questions I asked at the beginning of the webinar. And they were, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? Do you believe that stress is harmful to your health? Now, there was a study carried out by the University of Wisconsin, and it involved 30,000 people over an 8-year period. And they were asked these very two questions. The researchers then spent the next 8 years looking at the public health records to see who had survived or who had died. Bad news first. People who said they'd experienced a lot of stress in the previous year were found to have a 43% increased risk of dying. That was some research carried out in 2012 by Keller, Litzelman and Wisk. However, that was only true for those who believed that stress was harmful for their health. They experienced a lot of stress but did not view it as harmful were no more likely to die. In actual fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of all the people in the study, including those who'd actually experienced only a very little stress in the previous 12 months. Over the 8-year period, it was found that 182,000 people died early. However, not from stress, but the belief that stress was harmful. So 182,000 people went to an early grave simply because, not from the actual stress they'd experienced, but simply from their belief, the way that they thought about stress. Now, that statistic actually puts stress at number 15 in the list of causes of death in the USA. I just want to stop for a moment and just pause about this for a moment and think about how stress is portrayed in our society, how it's generally perceived, the language we use to talk about stress, even down to stress management programs. So again, share your thoughts in chat. What is the underpinning belief in the majority of instances? How do we as a society view stress? thought into chat, that would be fantastic. Stress is bad. Negative, leading to burnout. Yeah, absolutely. It's viewed negatively and a bad thing. And that is so true. As society, we have been brought up to think that stress is bad. And I'm as guilty as an awful lot of other trainers over the years. When we've been doing stress management courses, we've talked about, how bad stress is for our health. And that's how a lot of stress management courses have been delivered historically, that stress is something that is bad for us. But as we can see from the science, and by following the science, actually, we need to change that. Just take a moment just to reflect about the language you personally use. And I'm not going to ask you to share this, but just stop for that moment, just to think about how you personally talk to yourself about stress, think about stress, and talk to other people about stress. Are you falling into that stress is bad camp? To chapter 2 now, challenging our thinking. Now is the time to challenge our thinking and take note of what science is actually telling us. And if we change our mindset about stress, we can then change the way our bodies respond to stress. Stress is overwhelming. Our fight or flight, the threat response is triggered, and our brain starts to shut down all non-essential processes, including access to part of our memory and our cognitive networks, making it harder to think clearly and logically. I'm sure you've all experienced it when you've been under pressure, quite a great deal of pressure, and the latest terminology that's bandied about is brain fog. We find it very difficult to think logically and clearly. However, if we change the way we think about stress, we can change that threat response into a challenge response. And by viewing the stress response as a resource, something that is there to help us. So when a challenge response is triggered, it gives us greater access to all our senses and resources. Yes, our heart may still be pounding, but if we are in this positive challenge response mindset, then our blood vessels remain relaxed, allowing more blood to flow to the brain. Our attention maintains an open kind of status. We're more aware of the situation, what's going on, rather than that laser focus that we tend to get when we're in our fight or flight. Now, Harvard University suggests that we should, when we're experiencing stress, we should remind ourselves, okay, I'm feeling stressed out, and that's a resource I can use to help me. The challenge response, when we change our mindset from this negative stress response to a challenge response, a much more positive kind of energy, actually makes us smarter when we are stressed. Randomly, just pick on one person that's in the webinar at the moment and ask you, and I want you to imagine that I'm going to pick on you. And if I was to ask you to count backwards from 996 in increments of 7, you have to count out loud and as fast as you can. And the rest of us on this webinar are just going to be here listening to you and judging how well you are doing. How do you think your body's likely to respond? A quick word in chat for me. Panicked. Absolutely. Definitely go into panic. And when we go into that panic state, then typically our heart starts pounding. We break out into a sweat. We start breathing faster. Now, these are all typical physiological responses to stress. But what if we change that thinking about those physiological responses? Our heart pounding is actually us getting ready for action. The faster breathing means that we're getting more oxygen to the brain. Our physiological responses are actually priming us for the challenge. They're going to help us there. They're a resource that's there to help us to rise to the challenge. Study, people were put under similar stressful conditions, and they were buddied up in pairs, and they were asked to count backwards from 996 in increments of 7, and the other person wasn't so much judging them, but the other person that they were paired with was asked to actually keep interrupting them and annoying them, trying to distract them, basically. Now, what the kind of outcomes were, the people who the stress response has been helpful, the physiological responses has been helpful, were more confident, they were less anxious. And that physical response actually started to change. So typically when we're experiencing stress, our heart rate goes up, our blood vessels constrict. But the individuals who viewed the stress response as being helpful, their blood vessels remained opened. Their physical response was actually more similar to what we'd observe when somebody is being courageous, and perhaps even in moments of joy, a little bit of touch of excitement in there. So to help us change the way we view our experience of stress, we need to start telling ourselves, this is my body preparing me to rise to the challenge I'm facing. So perhaps a little bit of a mantra, you might want to even put it on a post-it note or post-it notes and pop them around your house or your workspace. So this is my body preparing me to rise to the challenge. We're actually changing that mindset to a stress is enhancing type of mindset. So now we're kind of ready to take it to the next level. How can we actually change that mindset? What can we actually do to stop it from being stress is harmful and debilitating to stress is helpful and enhancing? And Fredrickson, we need to focus on the many talents and resources that we have available to us that will help us rise to the challenges we're facing. This will then change the way we view that stressful situation to ensure that we don't limit access to our cognitive abilities by triggering that stress response. In turn, that will start to then build up our resilience, because we know that we will then be able to call upon our increased resources in a range of situations. In effect, we'll higher our stress tolerance levels. We'll become much more resilient by changing the way that we view and think about stress. So move to chapter 3, the Think More to Stress Less model. Now, this is based upon the science of stress is enhancing. And we've developed the Think More to Stress Less model, which is an easy to recall kind of framework to help us in those stressful situations. So the framework focuses upon the development of adaptive coping responses that increases the awareness of the resources as an individual has available to them. Take a closer look at each of the 4 kind of stages, and it may help you as we go through those stages to actually, first of all, recall a current stressful situation, something that is currently causing you stress in your life. And I won't be asking you to share this at all, but it will just help you kind of walk through the model and see how it can kind of work. Stage one, it's the notice stage. And here we're taking notice of what is going on for us. What is causing us to feel stressed? Now, this is where, again, that practice of being present, being more mindful helps us, because it's so much easier when we are present to actually notice when we start to feel stressed. But as soon as we start to feel stress and become aware of that, then we need to notice what exactly is going on for us. We need to be curious about our thinking, our self-talk. What are we actually telling ourselves? Our emotions and our physiological responses. How do we actually feel? Have we got those sweaty palms? Have we got a heart pounding? Take a moment now just to think about something that's going to cause you or is causing you stress in your life. As I say, I'm not going to ask you to share it at all. It's just I just want you to use that to explore your current thinking, your current self-talk, how it makes you actually feel the emotions and your physiological responses that you've noticed. Okay. So obviously, if you were doing this on your own for real, you could take longer about that. But it's important, as I say, just to really notice the impact of how you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself, your emotions, and how that is affecting your physiological response. Stage two, then, we now start to reflect upon our strengths and talents. This is where having, again, a high level of self-awareness is important. And this is where we at Jigsaw use our behavioural profiles to help us identify our personal strengths. One of the things that we know is that it's very easy. If I asked you now to take an A4 sheet of paper and fill it on one side with all the things you are not so great at, you'd probably be able to do that really easily, and maybe even ask for a second sheet of paper. But if I then asked you to do exactly the same, to completely fill an A4 sheet of paper with all the many strengths and talents and the things you were good at, you would probably find that much harder to do. We're not naturally great at recognizing our own strengths and talents, and that's why it's important to have that higher level of self-awareness, and tools like Jigsaw and other tools that's out there as well, all the kind of profiling tools, actually help us to identify our own personal strengths. Having spent time thinking about your own kind of personal strengths, the second part of stage two is to then uncover what we call the real cause of your stress. And we do that by asking ourselves two questions. And those questions are, what is at risk for me? And why does it matter? So, for example, in a situation where an individual, you've been asked by your boss to pick up a piece of work at short notice because one of your colleagues is ill. Now, depending on your behavioural preference, it could be that what is at risk for you might be you feel your reputation is at risk if you don't kind of do the work to your usual high kind of standard. It could be you feel that actually your own time is at risk because your time's being wasted. You're not working towards your own outcomes and your own goals and the things that you have to achieve. You may feel that your freedom and choice is at risk. It might be that you feel that actually you're at risk of letting other people down because you're not used to doing this, and maybe you won't do it to the same kind of standard that somebody else would do it. The real cause of the stress that you're experiencing is not that piece of work. For yourselves right now, I asked you to recall something that is causing you stress. And I'd like you to ask yourself these questions for you as well. What's at risk for me and why does it matter? So I'm going to pause again for a minute or so to give you time to think about, first of all, what strengths and talents have you got? And secondly, to think about the real cause of stress. What is at risk for you? And what is the real cause of your stress? Hopefully you've had a few moments to think about that one now. So we're moving on to stage 3, the reappraise stage. So having identified your strengths and talents in the previous stage, here we're going to focus now on how do your strengths and talents support you in your current stressful situation? How can I use my strengths as a resource to help me rise to that challenge? How can I start to think differently about this situation? What can I do that will reduce the risk to my personal values? And how can I change my self-talk? So again, going back to the illustration that I used, the example of the person who'd been asked to pick up another piece of work. If you felt that it was your reputation that was at risk, perhaps what you do is start to think of it more as seeing it as, first of all, the strengths we've got. Well, our strengths are probably logical processing, a structured approach, that attention for kind of detail. So therefore, it's perhaps we can see it as an opportunity to set the standard. If it was time being wasted, not working towards your own outcomes, then we could perhaps view it as maybe gaining experience that could be helpful to us in the future. An opportunity perhaps for perspective taking, seeing things that other people do, understanding more about other people's role. And again, the strengths that we've got, we're probably very good at working under pressure and rising to a challenge. Choice was what you felt was at risk for you. Well, perhaps we've got some choices to where we do it, how we do it. We opportunity to do something different, and again to use our creative problem solving talents. Was risk of letting other people down, then we can focus on the fact that we're helping a colleague here. Remind ourselves of all the similar work that we've done, all the strengths and talents that we've used previously in that similar work that can help us at the moment. We can think about how we've made other people feel by helping them and how we felt ourselves when we've actually helped other people. So now, again, I'll just stop just momentarily to give you a few moments to reappraise your stressful situation and think about how you could think differently about it and how your strengths are going to support you. Stage 4 now, embrace. So by focusing on our strengths and changing our self-talk that we've done in the previous stages, then you've started to build your inner confidence and self-belief that you can actually rise to the challenge and demands that you're facing. So that negative energy that was created by the stress response will be replaced with positive energy of a challenge response. So you're now ready to embrace the challenge. And it means that actually, not only do you feel more energized, you might even just feel a little bit more excited by the prospect. knowing that you have got what it takes, you have got those available resources. The stress that you're experiencing is now at an acceptable level. You've got the resources to meet the challenge. So you may recall it in one of the from earlier in one of the studies that I spoke about. It was reported that people who had a stress is enhancing or helpful mindset were more confident and less anxious, and therefore better able to rise to the challenge. Their response had made them smarter because they were able to maintain the use of their cognitive abilities. They hadn't triggered that threat response of fight or flight, meaning that their cognitive abilities hadn't started to, as I say, go offline, hadn't started to close down. A little word of warning though, do not expect that the next time you start to feel stressed, you will automatically start to go notice, acknowledge, reappraise, embrace, and go through those stages. You won't, but don't worry, you're not alone. You have to practice, like everything else. You have to practice using the framework over and over again until it becomes your way of managing stressful situations. Because we've got to develop those new neural networks and create a new habit before it will become an automated response to stress, the way that we deal with stress. However, is when a stressful situation has passed, take some time out and stop and work through the process. Now, by practicing going through the framework after the situation has passed, you will, over a period of time, move towards this being your stress coping response, which will lead then to that enhanced resilience that McEwen spoke about in one of the earlier slides, as you learn to apply the framework to different situations which trigger your stress response. To leave you with a parting thought. Changing the way you think about stress could be the difference between a stress-induced heart attack in your 50s and living well into your 90s. Oh, thank you for joining us today. If anyone has got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. You can either pop them in chat or you can unmute yourself, that's fine. Or if you prefer to drop me an email, please just get in touch. My email is on screen at the moment. Our next webinar is on the 26th of April, and we're going to be speaking about leadership and the development of emotional intelligence skills for relationship management. We've also got a virtual jigsaw taster session coming up, which is on the 30th of March. And again, there you'll have an opportunity to actually complete your own personal behavioural map using the Jigsaw Discovery tool. And to find out more about that, just visit our website, the events page on the website, jigsawdiscoverytool.com, and you can actually find out more about it there. So if anybody has got any questions, as I say, I'm very happy to answer them either in chat, or if you prefer to contact me offline by email, that's absolutely fine. Thank you to everybody.